Alright, so we're going to do Board Gamers video now. So let me do this. It goes for 10 minutes, but because of the topic, it might actually go a lot longer. So I'm going to turn the music off. Wasted 3. Are you trying to turn them off? Like, I haven't tried turning a camera off for this patch, so I wouldn't be able to tell you, mate. This is Board Gamers video. Star Citizen, Future Master Modes, and the flight experience. Now, this is actually a recent video, literally yesterday. Board Gamer normally does current topics, so I believe he's going to be bringing up stuff that Yogi has said recently. I don't know, I couldn't find any sort of links to the references that Yogi actually, or where he got this information from. So there's no references for where the information came from. He's quoting Yogi. I'm pretty sure it's coming from Spectrum. I know there is a screenshot of Yogi talking about updates that are coming for Master Modes, but probably won't come until after 4.0. Let's see what this is about though. Like, I'm interested to find out what Board Gamers got to report here, because it's normally current news.
Hello and welcome to some more Star Citizen. The future of Star Citizen's flight model with Master Modes has been a hot pick over the last year. And there were some fantastic dev responses that I saw about this and more today that I want to talk about in regards to the future of the flight experience and Master Modes in Star Citizen. But I do also want to say that we're expecting a load of updates to the combat model, to Master Modes, to the flight experience and all that sort of stuff in Alpha 4.0 and beyond. Anyway, they're going to keep on evolving it, and hopefully it will get better and better and better. There was a question asked in a thread. It would be highly appreciated to hear what you are planning to do with Master Modes. As it stands, it is a reason for quite a lot of us to barely be playing at all, as we simply don't enjoy flying in Star Citizen anymore. I am primarily a PvE industrial player, yet even here, Master Modes has knocked the fluidity and fun out of flying. Is there any acknowledgement from CIG that the current iteration is not great, and what are you planning to do to improvement? Yogi Clack responded here saying we're pretty happy with the direction of Master Modes and its changes. Some balance issues aside, it achieved what it was meant to achieve, but it doesn't mean we're done with the flight model. There is actually quite an extensive list of things we need and want to do on the flight model, and that includes things like changing the travel dynamics, slow speed handling, trying out different acceleration models, enabling control surfaces, adding jerk, and a few other things. But most of that stuff will not pop up before 4.0 is released, so it really is too early to talk about the details yet. There was then a follow-up question. Just so we're all on the same page, could you please elaborate what specifically Master Modes has achieved? Which design and gameplay goals have been met thus far in the process? Yogi responded, the main goal around Master Modes was to reintroduce the relative slow flight gameplay. We're talking WW2 early fighter speeds. The reason for that is that with 3.0, the persistent universe was added, so Star Citizen had to offer ways to quickly traverse the game, hence the high traversal speeds had to be added. That, however, fundamentally broke the intended combat geometry, small bubbles of exciting combat gameplay. What this resulted in over a longer period of time is that a tiny portion of players got really good at playing PvP combat through relying solely on one or two strategies, but overall, the players engaging in combat consistently dropped over time.
He's still going.
Master Modes change was proposed a few years ago to keep the main gameplay loops of traversal versus everything else separated and make combat more accessible again. Therefore, we prototyped and tested it internally for a while, moved it to Squadron 42 because the development focus was happening there, and finally moved it back to the Persistent Universe stream last year, where we tested it in Arena Commander for 2 cycles before releasing it earlier this year. It achieved the following things.
Pretty big response. I want to know where this post is. Couldn't find it. I actually went looking for it and couldn't find it. And then I saw Board Gamers talking about it anyway, so I figured I'd just watch the video. Like, I'm interested in why people are so upset about Master Mode, to be honest. Like, myself personally, I don't really care. Like, when it comes to the flight model is going to be whatever CIG decides it is going to be. And when I hear about people saying, oh, the flight model wasn't fun, or this flight model isn't fun, like, okay, well, what do you mean by fun? Like, what's your definition of fun when it came to the flight model? Because I would take this flight model over the previous one because it forces you to commit to a fight. If you want to fight, you have to commit to it. If you are going to run, you're going to take a risk. to run. You can do it, but you're taking a risk to do it. Whereas before, there wasn't any sort of risk. Yeah, pretty sure I reacted to a video from Avenger 1 getting angry about it. I remember, I've reacted to a lot of stuff now. Like for me, yeah, like I like this flight model purely because it forces you into a fight. It forces you to make commitments. You know, you got to make a decision, commit to the fight. And Yogi is right, although I think we're starting to see the same effect again with master modes. But the previous flight model only had a small amount of people that were interested in mastering it. But I think that's a really poor metric to try and base encouraging people to, you know, like, well, base a design decision change, or, you know, use it as a reason. Oh yeah, we noticed that less people were engaging with it, so we're changing it up to see if more people engage with it. It's like, well, you know, why were those people not engaging with it in the first place? And, you know, like the point of 1 or 2 strategies being used to master the flight model, it's okay. Well, what other things do you want them to master? Like if human beings are really good at pattern recognition, so after a period of time of interacting with something, once we work out the pattern that can allow us to achieve a goal within the shortest period of time possible, in the easiest way possible, we will do it that way every single time, because we've found the most optimal. Like, we are hardwired to find the optimal way of doing something, or what we perceive as the optimal way of doing something. Sometimes we don't find the optimal way of doing something, but we think it is. Considering the steep learning curve, I'm not sure how to even balance this. Well, when I first talked about master modes and what I thought was CIG was trying to achieve with it, like, there's a rule in game development, or law, it's called Bayes' law, and it goes along the lines of easy to learn, difficult to master. So the flight model should be something that is easy to learn. Okay, you can fly around, you can go forward, back, left, right, up, down, you know, pitch yaw, whatever, roll. You can take off, land, go shoot something, travel from one place to another. The previous flight model, you could do all that. The current flight model, you can do all that. But the pathway to mastery needs to be something where players just have to feel like they're like, if you want more players to achieve mastery in something, they have to feel like they're making progress throughout the entire journey, right? And if they don't feel like they're making progress, they'll stop engaging. Now, you've got the outliers who, it's either if they don't see immediate progress, they'll just drop it. Or the ones who are like, they only need to see, you know, minuscule amounts of progress to encourage them to keep going. Those are the two extremes. Previous flight model, that's the way that CIG is essentially saying, is like, only those who are happy with seeing minuscule progress engaged with it. Whereas in this current model, CIG hasn't mentioned anything yet. I think they're going to talk about it here. Or I interrupted. CIG would have the metrics on it, but I believe they would see like more players engaging with it and less players dropping off. Except what they're probably also seeing is a lot of players who played the old flight model for a long period of time, who've come into master modes and not like the change, have decided, hey, I'm just not going to play until you guys revert it back. And that is one of the reasons why I'm always interested to hear, like, why do you think it's shit? Like, what's so bad about this flight model? I think one person was able to give a good description. Like, it feels like I'm flying through mud. And what I've seen is that, like, I didn't feel like I haven't felt like I'm flying through mud in this flight model. I didn't feel like I was flying through mud in the other flight model, but I also didn't feel like I was free and fluid in the other flight model too. It just felt like if I went too fast, I couldn't control the turns that I needed to do in order to stay engaged with the target. I needed to slow down, but I didn't have to slow down as much as master modes. Big bones of contention I have seen is that the skill ceiling has dropped due to the maneuverability cap and also the B button being a one-click merge feature from nav to SCM. Okay, I wouldn't say the skill ceiling's dropped, because if you say that the skill ceiling's dropped, it means that those players who were at the top percentage before, if the skill ceiling drops, then those top players in the previous flight model are in a position where there's more players that are able to meet and beat them. And I don't think that's the case in this flight model. I believe that the skill ceiling is still there. It's just that a lot of players haven't risen to meet it yet. And I don't think a lot of players have actually hit the skill ceiling yet. What's happened with master modes though, I believe the skill floor has been lowered, so it's easier to get into. And that's what I mean. Like, that's the impression I got from master modes. Easy to learn, difficult to master. But when the skill floor is lowered, that's the easy entry. Mastery is difficult because the skill ceiling, nobody knows where it is really yet. Like, I don't think anybody's, like people are sitting there going, yeah, like these guys are really good, and those guys are sitting there going, yeah, we don't really think that we've hit the skill ceiling yet. Like we're good, but we think that we might be able to get better or like do something more. One ace could kite and kill 15 people, but now we got beaten eventually. Is that a good or bad thing? I don't know. Well, yeah. Then again, like we've had a significant change. Like the flight model has changed a lot from the previous to the current one. So a flight model, an ace in the previous flight model may not be an ace in the next one, and those people can't accept that. Like they're good, but they can't accept that they're back at that position where they can do that thing. Or maybe they know that the skill ceiling has lowered, because I'm not a fucking ace pilot in Star Citizen. I'm only talking, based on my own observations here. But their previous experience of, being able to murder 15 people on their own versus now where they're struggling with 2. Like, all right, well, should they be able to do that? I don't think they should. How would you feel if you were one of those 15 people getting smashed by 1? Feel pretty shit. A lot of people would just sit there and go, that guy's hacking. There's no way that he could beat the 15 of us. 15 is probably an exaggeration, but I know like Avenger 1's gone into fights, was it 1v6? A 1v6 and, beat the shit out of the guys. They're really bad pilots. So, like, what? Where's the metric there? Like, the skill gap being closed, has it? Or maybe the skill floor was lowered enough that more people could get involved in it, and they've been encouraged by the progress that they've been able to see, and they've just improved because of it. CIG would have the metrics on that, and they've been making tweaks as well. Fantastic. This patch is 100% less populated than previous patches. Like, yeah, in this particular situation, I believe this is the second patch where we've got master modes in the live build, right? And CIG is still making minor tweaks. They're still tweaking the ships and that. And there's going to be fundamental skills that they'll need to learn or relearn with the new flight model. And maybe we haven't hit the point where they've like learnt those skills yet, or they haven't practiced them enough to perfect them. As Dev's saying, and I think this is an accurate descriptor, that people are pissed at their effort of learning the old model is now effectively gone. Like, there is still translation of skills. Like, those who were good in the previous flight model can hold their own in this one. Like, it's not a massive reset for them. I would say that it's more people are able to engage them at a level where they don't believe they should be able to defeat them. They're going up against more opponents that are, who in previous patches were probably less effective, weren't as good. And in this model, they're able to be competitive. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it should be motivating, those players who really want to master flight combat to push harder. But there's also a point, and this is where feedback to CIG is important, where it's like, look, we've been going ham for the last 8 months on master modes, and we're just not seeing any improvement. Like, we've hit a ceiling and we just cannot break through. Is this it? Have we hit the skill ceiling? Is it more that people are upset that they wasted their time on the old model, or is it that people are concerned they'll just change the model again, so they're hesitant to relearn? Like, I was in that boat. I knew that the previous flight model that we had was going to change because it didn't meet the design goals of what Chris Roberts wanted. He wanted World War II planes in space, and we didn't have World War II planes in space. So the previous flight model that we had, I always knew was going to get changed. How it was going to change, no fucking idea. When it was going to happen, no idea. But that's one of the reasons why I didn't really commit to like getting better at the old flight model. And I won't lie, like this new flight model, I like it better than the previous one, but I'm still not that motivated to like really get good at that flight model. Like when I first started playing Star Citizen, all we had was Arena Commander, but I enjoyed the shit out of the first flight model that we had. But at the same time, it's like, made changes and they're like, there's not enough diversity there, not enough opportunity for skill expression, for people to get better at something. And so, it kept changing. And that's where I worked out. It's like, yeah, the flight model is going to keep changing over time. DLG's still dialing it in. There are people out there who say, oh, this flight model from this patch was the best. And I'm just sitting there going, I don't even remember that flight model. Yeah, like I liked the first flight model. I enjoyed it and it made me want to fly. Like I fly now because I have to. If you want to do piracy, you got to fly. If went with what Star Wars physics is using, they might. Like there's nothing stopping them from trying that. Myself personally, like I'm not attached to a flight model. I just want CIG to settle on something and then I can just go, all right, this is it, digging into it. Let's go. It turns out to be something that I won't that I don't enjoy, I'll be like, all right, I'll push myself to get good enough and make sure that I am an asset to my org when it comes to flight combat. I probably won't push for mastery. Whereas if it's a flight model that I enjoy, I will probably push to master it because I enjoy it. I only like doing things that I enjoy, just like everybody else. So, like, whilst a lot of people out there do complain about the current flight model, and some people say, no, it's good, and, I reckon it's better than the previous one, but I'm also not saying that it should stay exactly the same way that it is now. I do think CIG needs to tweak it, improve it so that it's enjoyable to fly again. Let's keep watching.
Combat on average is now much closer, simply because the speeds are slower. Combat overall is more accessible and balanced. This comes from slower speeds, escaping is harder, the addition of tricording limits, which was the sole strategy that pro pilots relied on, coupled with very strict tuning limits from the ship archetypes. This improved group fights and made sure that pro pilots can't take on 7 newbies anymore. Ship differences are a lot more meaningful because the cording limiters make tuning differences actually matter, so these things are a big win for us, and that is mirrored by a bigger chunk of players engaging in combat and in the feedback we get over all channels. I've also just realized a load of you aren't going to know what tricording is. Basically, that's moving in 3 axes at the same time that effectively allows you to move your ship faster than you could with just your sort of main thruster or a single direction of thrusters. You're effectively using 3 directions of thrusters to move faster than you could normally. And if you get very good at it, then you are able to outpace, outmaneuver, effectively outrange and dodge enemies. Anyway, going back to that post, it is important to note here though that master modes were just a step in the overall development. It pushed the game a good step forward to where we want it, but the work on flight and combat is not finished at all. Here is a rough selection of things that are pretty dominant in our own internal lists to approach next.
I'm just going to hide the stats in chat for a second so that we can actually read this out. Okay, so rough selection of things that are pretty dominant in our own internal list to approach next. Tuning wise, there are several ships and weapons in the wrong place. The maneuvering options are often too limited. Nose-to-nose DPS racing and backstrafing are too dominant. The mining flow suffered. Crappy mechanics are not as fun as they should be. Nav mode feels too vulnerable. Light feels too slow at times, although we're buzzing around at Mark 1 at times. The transition, a slow high speed doesn't feel right. The traversal flow in general needs improvement. Those are the things that are dominant in their internal list to approach next. They're always going to be tuning ships and weapons, and honestly, until they get armor in, I don't see any purpose behind tuning weapons. Flatten line them again and just tune the ships in terms of maneuver until we've got ship armor, and then you can really focus on it. I think they're committing too much time to that tuning, because ship armor is crucial because it's damage mitigation. Damage application, damage mitigation. Dodging incoming fire is damage mitigation. Ship armor is a form of damage mitigation. Shields are a form of damage mitigation. And the tactics that you decide to use whilst engaging in a fight rely on how you mitigate damage on you and how you apply damage onto your opponent. So with a significant piece of their damage mitigation missing, I don't understand how they're thinking they're going to be able to tune the ships in a way where they're not going to have to go back later and retune them. And if they're just doing it just for the sake of, like the patch, or, to keep people engaged with the game, fair enough. But if it's like one of these things where they're hoping to, like achieve tuning close to where they need it to be for when they introduce Maelstrom for the damage model, I don't see it happening. They'll end up making massive changes once we get the, ship armor in. The maneuvering options are often too limited. Nose-to-nose DPS racing and backstrafing are too dominant. Like in that particular problem there, like CIG is going to have to put in some serious limitations to prevent that from happening. What those limitations are, the only one that I could come up with, and I actually suggested this to CIG years ago, was the introduction of a component that's on the nose of your ship, and it's designed to scramble your opponent's ability to get a ballistic lock on you quickly. So if you end up in this nose-to-nose battle, both of you are going to struggle to get ballistic solutions on each other. So what you're both going to get forced to do is try and outmaneuver each other in a way so that you get the noses off of each other, right? You end up in this position where you're getting the noses off each other. So instead of fighting like this and, shooting at each other like that, with what I was proposing, scrambling the ballistic computers so you can't hit each other, so you're always doing these ones if you're looking at each other. So what that forces you to do is have to try and maneuver off your opponent's nose and around. It means that it's another component as well. So if you manage to damage it, you can prevent your opponent from having that capability anymore, and you can get into those nose DPS races, because the purpose of combat is to destroy your opponent before you destroy them. Players are all we're always going to try and face our opponent. That's just the way that it is. And the fact is that so long as we're in a 3D environment with the ability to look at our opponent and they can look at us, we're just going to end up in these DPS races, always. And backstrafing is being used as a method of compensating for somebody being able to chase and maneuver around you, because if you can backstrafe fast and somebody can, accelerate, why would they not do that? And, the whole idea of the acceleration egg, where you could accelerate faster forward than backwards, doesn't really matter if your opponent's able to backstrafe and then change direction so that their nose is always looking at you and they're always moving backwards. Because your ability to try and accelerate around them is always based on you moving forward. So if they try to accelerate to get around you and get a different angle, you can then use that same principle, go backstrafe as soon as they start accelerating past you, boost forward, turn back around, start backstrafing again. What are you going to do? That is why I truly believe the ability to scramble your opponent's ballistic solution is going to be the best solution here. I don't think CIG is going to do it. I think they're going to keep focusing on thruster manipulation. The mining flow suffered. How? I don't do enough mining to know, but how? They have to go into SCM. The mining ships have VTOL. You can use the, speed limiter to try and reduce your max speed output. Maybe it has something to do with thruster acceleration. I don't know. Crappy mechanics not as fun as they should be. Pretty much QED is easy mode. Mining flow overall speed, but for movement in flight, found it annoying to go into SCM mode to use your scrapers on the Vulture as well. Why? I don't get that. Why would you try and use them in nav mode? You don't have shields in nav mode. You don't have your weapons in nav mode. Not weapons per se. Well, I get that, but I mean, why would you want to be in a mode where you're vulnerable to attack? Because your shields are down. They've got free reign on you. You get attacked by somebody, they manage to get the drop on you, you don't have your shields up, you're just going to get shat on. My perspective on this is based on movement. The mining flow suffered because they couldn't maneuver around well enough, or maybe they couldn't hold their position. I don't know. I can't think of anything in the current master modes model where you can't stay stationary, where you can't go VTOL, where you can't control your max speed so you don't crash into things. The only problem that I'd see is you want to maneuver around and it's really slow and sluggish as opposed to feeling snappy. Well, I do it too. I forget about switching modes too, when I'm doing piracy and stuff like that. Unless I'm flying the QED, in which case I have to switch modes if I want to be able to use QED. Nav mode feels too vulnerable. I don't know about that. The entire purpose of your shields going away was to discourage people from thinking that they could just run away from a fight. You have to deal with the problem that you got there, and if you're not willing to fight that problem, then organize the ability for somebody else to fight the problem. If they change nav mode so that you can have shields up, that wouldn't bother me. Wouldn't bother me at all. It just makes it easier for us as pirates to attack somebody in nav mode because their shields are down. But most people, as soon as when they're in nav mode and we've used QED on them, alright, well, they can't go above SCM anyway, so they switch back to SCM mode so they at least get their shields. I don't know if CIG should be doing anything about, trapping mechanics in nav mode yet. This feels like it's a design issue amongst players working together or hiring NPCs to defend them. I don't think that's a flight model issue. They feel it's an issue, so see how it goes. Flight feels too slow at times. I'll say this, when I'm in combat, there's times where I just don't feel like I have, my maneuvering thrusters aren't strong enough to put me in the position that I want to be in. And part of that is going to be like my inexperience at flight combat, right? Like, you know, like not predicting my opponent's maneuver, not thinking ahead and, you know, how I'm going to maneuver my ship, be in a position of advantage over theirs. But there's times where I'm like, I am trying to perform that maneuver and it just not getting there. Then again, like, I don't know if they really need to address that. The transition slow and high speed doesn't feel right. Yeah, like the sudden drop in speed. Like I'd say not going from slow to high, I'd say going from high to slow speeds. That needs to be addressed. Like it shouldn't be like this massive deceleration. It should be something that you have to compensate for, or if you do, like if you are moving at max speed and you go to SCM, your ship should literally just like automatically start boosting to slow you down, and you should like be redding out and shit, or blacking out, or whatever. Reversal flow in general needs improvements. Yeah, I don't know what he means by that. Right, let's bring this back.
Tuning wise, there are several ships and weapons in the wrong place. The maneuvering options are often too limited, nose-to-nose, DPS, racing and backstrafing are too dominant. The mining flow has suffered. Trapping mechanics are not as fun as they should be. Nav mode feels too vulnerable. Flight feels too slow at times, although we're buzzing around at Mach 1 at times. The transition between slow and high speeds doesn't feel right, and the traversal flow in general needs improvement. When we approach these things depends a bit on the availability of resources. Currently the focus is on other topics, pyro, resource networks, etc. So do not expect things to change.
Yeah, I think that's what they mean. Interdiction and like snaring and dampening. It's the only mechanics that I can think of that would be trapping.
Too soon. I am pretty sure that after 4.0 we'll get some traction on this again though. There was another question. Quantum Boost, is that still a thing? YogiClat again responded, Quantum Boost is part of the Quantum Travel Experience feature. It is not part of Master Mode's changes. We just showed it last CitizenCon to give you an idea of what the flow looks like. It is fully enabled in Squadron 42, but not ready for the persistent universe yet. So we know this as the sort of new quantum travel experience where you are sort of having to be hands-on while you accelerate up to quantum travel speeds. You have to keep your ship within the quantum tunnel, otherwise you can like damage components and the sort of jump will fail. But once you've got fully accelerated, then you can go hands off. I really like that Clan Imperium talking like that and answering questions. It's super important, obviously, master modes and the flight experience and general combat. It needs to hugely be balanced. I think that's one of the things. And obviously there have been major changes that, especially some of the high-level dogfighters that we're using tricording and other maneuvers can't do now. They might be a bit disappointed in that. I like the idea of where master modes are going, but it still potentially could end in a terrible place or whatever, right? Like it needs love and attention, it needs refinement, and I know that's sort of a catch-all, very, it just needs to refine it. It'll be better in the future. But I do genuinely believe that, like, a lot of the stuff just needs to be ironed out. I totally understand that CIG want loadouts to be a meaningful sort of thing, and you can't have ace pilots that can take on 12 other fighters simultaneously and expect to actually beat them in combat. I am really interested to know what your thoughts on master modes, the direction of the flight model and experience are in the comments below. Do you absolutely hate it? Do you think, oh yeah, actually it's good, but, or you're like, well, let's see where it goes? Whatever your thoughts on that, I'd love to know, but please be civil. I suspect there are some people there going, you can't be serious, these are terrible, how can you think they're good or they're gonna be good? I certainly don't think they're great yet, but I do think they're able to get there. I can certainly see what they're trying to do. There was another question as well, actually, as part of this thread. Weapon groups do not persist between flight modes in 3.24, and the response from YogiClat here was, hey, yes, that was an oversight from us. The reason why it's not persistent is because when you swap to nav mode, you actually gain and lose control of certain controllers. I'll see what we can do and add a quick fix potentially for that, but chances are not too big because the old weapon group system will get replaced anyway soon with the so-called weapon preset system that comes along with the resource network patch, which will have weapon assignments persist between mode changes. So yeah, I'm still expecting a reasonable amount of updates for balance and tunings and stuff like that in 4.0, but obviously they've got loads more planned beyond that aren't going to make it into that patch. But as I said, really interested to know what you think in the comments below. And are you excited for Alpha 4.0? And what about those Titan suits, eh? Why? Oh, excitement. Also, Tobii Eye Trackers, they're on sale.
Is that it?
Still, if you want yourself that's natively supported in Star Citizen, high precision head and eye tracking, it works rather. Check out the link in the discounts at the moment. What's in the box? That is what Pandora asked. She was told not to open that box, but she did. The internet is like Pandora's box, full of the chaos of the world.
It's fucking NordVPN. Hey, it was NordVPN all along. All right, where are we? All right, so that was pretty much it for Board Gamers video. After that, it's just an ad and then just a blurb on what we think, which she was already going into. I wonder how they feel they can make it more fun. Honestly, I don't know. Like for me, making master modes more fun, I believe like the acceleration, like they talk about adding jerk, and I think really that's gonna be, I believe that being able to accelerate in a specific direction quickly, regardless if it's forward, back, left or right, I think will help with improving the geometry of combat. It doesn't need to be a long burst, and this is the problem that we've got, is that we're always accelerating to like max speed and then we're able to hold it for as long as we want. In master modes, it's like you can go above it to a certain, ceiling and then go down, so long as you got the boost fuel, right? Well, this is where I think we need other parameters for management. So, like boosting in a specific direction for too long causes thrusters to start overheating. So you need to account for that. To be honest, like I seriously think the low-hanging fruit here is that you want to stop players from getting into the nose-on-nose fights. Right? That's the key. If you're able to stop players getting into nose-on-nose fights, everything else starts sorting itself out, because it means that everybody's doing this combat geometry shit. And it also means like they're like, all right, well, I need to try and, pull away, maneuver around, force my opponent to do a certain maneuver to try and get to me, and then I can do a maneuver, attack them whilst avoiding their nose. But the problem that we've got is that CIG doesn't want to introduce, or, at this current point in time, it doesn't look like they want to introduce a device that discourages players from looking at each other's noses. Because that's the problem. The flight combat issue that we've got is nose-to-nose fights is the reason why we have half the problems that we've got. And once CIG addresses that problem, we will start seeing an improvement in players' attitude towards flight combat. Because when everybody talks about, World War II type, dogfighting, it's, it's all based on atmospheric fighting, right? So, energy expenditure and conservation, building energy, expending energy in order to maneuver your fighter plane to either gain an advantage on your opponent so that you can actually have an effect on them. You can't do nose-on-nose engagements throughout the entire fight. It's not like you could do circle strafing in World War II fighters, because that's not how atmospheric flight works. You start trying to do that shit in World War II planes, you're both gonna fall out of the sky. Helicopter battles is closer to what we got, and helicopters, nose on nose fighting each other, like that makes sense, but like, why would the helicopters ever try and outmaneuver each other, right? It's always going to be preferable for them try and get first rounds on target, so they're always going to be looking for the target and just shoot it immediately. They're not going to try and do some sort of energy conservation or expenditure unless they're in a position of disadvantage. If they're in a position of disadvantage in a bloody helicopter battle and it's a gunfight for some reason and they don't have missiles, then they're probably fucked anyway. That's why, like, my solution is put a device in the nose of everybody's ship where nose-on-nose battles scrambles each other's ballistic computers. Like, they play their own game. The problem that they've got, though, is that they have a design intent that they need to, meet. And whilst they can do design exploration, they only get a certain amount of time allocated to it. It's like any sort of software development. You only get a certain amount of time allocated to a task. And if it falls outside of that, and you ask for the extra time and they deny it, it's like, oh, guess we got to work with what we got. Also comes down to, like whether or not they believe that, what they've got works, or, what they believe that they can tweak it with. There's a reason why. Like, everybody keeps shitting on Yogi. Like, Yogi's been working on the flight model, for the longest period of time. He is probably one of the best people out there for doing tuning on the flight combat model, because he's been through so many iterations of it. So he knows what has worked and what hasn't. Are there any other games out there that do space combat well? Depends what you mean, UK boy. Like, what's your definition of space combat being done well? I've heard the most positive things about Star Wars Squadrons in terms of their flight model, but it's not the same as what Star Citizen is at all. But maybe that's the direction that CRG needs to go. Like, they kind of did in a certain way when it came to resource management and trying to get ships to accelerate fast in certain directions, but they didn't really do it that well. You're always, unfortunately, UK boy, we're going to be in this situation for a long time. There are a lot of people that hated the old flight model. They just learned to deal with it. That's something that I think a lot of people forgot, is that we had the old flight model for so long, and yet when we got something new, a lot of people just didn't like change. Felt more intense, more exciting. I had the opposite experience. Like the fights felt more intense when the combat was slowed down. We're all closer to each other fighting. But the old flight model allowed you to be able to tricord out to create distance, get your shields back, and then tricord back in to merge, prosecute your target. And it was just shit, because if you almost had your guy, if you almost had your opponent and they managed to get a good blow through on you, they were gone. That was it. Like a good blow through and that's it. You have no chance of getting them. And it just sucked, because those who perfect that maneuver, that's all they needed to do. And it would just turn into this fight of attrition, where it was like they just wear you down over time because they just did it longer than you did, and then just come in. Like, I started getting bored. During fights. Jousting's still a thing in the current flight model, but not as bad. The previous flight model, jousting, was terrible, and it was used as a method of like frustrating you to the point where you disengage from the fight mentally, and then they'd just come in and be like, yeah, we're gonna shit on you now. It's like, all right, well, I'm bored of this fight and I just want it to end, so I don't really care anymore, and just leave. Whereas now you're committed. Like, if you start a fight, you gotta fucking commit to it, and if you're gonna run, you better hope that you get away good, because if you don't, you will die. I like that. I like that a lot. And I think that's what a lot of the threats don't like. But you got the ones like, there's plenty of pilots out there that are like, all right, well, this is what we've got. We're going to focus on that. This is what we're going to focus on and get good at that. That's the right mentality. Give feedback to CIG, fucking hammer it. Give feedback to CIG and just master what's in front of you. But complaining and kicking and screaming and saying, no, this isn't what I want. It's the same mentality as what Care Bears have. But they're, throwing the bloody boys out of the cot.